Goes. So welcome to the third and final instalment of this year's Soapbox lectures. I say this year's in the hope that there might be some next year as well, but that remains to be seen. Thanks to Rod for last week and for his reflections about the changing face of Auckland, and particularly about Christianity's place within those changes. Tonight I hope to build a little bit on some of the things Rod says, particularly towards the end when I talk about maybe where Christianity might be going in the future. Tonight I'm going to begin by talking a little bit about someone who influenced me on my journey. 2 weeks ago I spoke about my teen years and those influences of punk and rock music and how they shaped my beliefs, particularly in regard to Jesus. But tonight I want to share more broadly about the person who really influenced how I approach religion in general. And that, wow, this is him. Hopefully some of you know who it is. Some of you will know him, of course, because of Lloyd Gearing's, had that great event really in New Zealand history. I don't think it's even something just within church history. I think it's much broader than that. So he was charged with doctrinal error in 1967, and those charges were brought against him by members of the Presbyterian Church here in New Zealand. In short, what that really means is he was charged with heresy. So we don't have many official heretics in New Zealand, but this was certainly an attempt to brand him, or tar him with that brush. I think it says a great deal about how much New Zealand has actually changed since then, as personally I don't think if there was a heresy trial in the church today that it would get television coverage as it did back in 1967. As many of you know, as far as that story goes, Gearing was not convicted of those charges, although he has in recent times suggested if those similar charges were brought by members of the Presbyterian Church today, he's not so sure that he would be found not guilty. So, there you go. Since that time, Gearing went on to become the Foundation Professor of Religious Studies at Victoria University in Wellington before he retired. I first came across him when I studied religion in that department, the department he founded. He has written numerous books, and dare I say it, he is one of the best writers of theology I've personally ever read. He has an amazing ability to take a huge number of ideas and share them in a very accessible way. And not just share them, I mean, he summarises great tracts of history in just a handful of sentences, which makes his material very useful. He's quick to point out that while some theologians are very good at articulating incredible sounding things in extremely complicated terms, many of those theologians are actually saying very little. Gearing is the opposite. For the most part, he writes very simply, but manages to communicate a great deal. In the year before I first moved to Auckland to begin studying theology at St John's, I was still studying religion at Victoria in Wellington, and that was when Gearing released what I think was one of his best books. And this is it, Christianity Without God. A friend of mine actually gave me this book for Christmas that year, and I read it twice in the weeks before beginning at St John's. So what that really means is it formed the foundation of most of my theology assignments in the following years. It was a very useful book to have read at that point when I was beginning a study of theology. So I credit him with at least half of my decent grades, so there you go. Some of you might wonder about the title. Gearing acknowledges that the title was really a creation of his publisher. He wanted to call it Christianity Without Theism, but appreciates that it probably wouldn't have sold quite as well if that had been the title. So there was certainly something about courting a little bit of controversy around it. And of course the sad thing is that lots of the people would really benefit from reading a book like this are just completely put off by this title. And in fact there's a huge amount of really accessible stuff for, I think, Christians of all walks of life who just simply are going to be put off by the cover. Having reread most of this book over the last week in preparation for tonight, I was surprised to find that whereas I once went along with almost everything that Gearing talks about, not so much anymore. I find that lots of his stuff's useful, but it's not really where I'm at anymore, particularly in relation to some of the conclusions in the final couple of chapters of this book. However, I do still think it's a really useful text, particularly in terms of how we view Christianity and how we view it now at this point in history. So I actually took the title of tonight's lecture from this book, in a section where Gehring uses the metaphor of a river to discuss just what Christianity is. So in a few minutes' time, that's what I will move on to talking about, Christianity as a stream of living culture.